Do you ever sense that even in 2026, amidst AI breakthroughs and the transition to green energy, your financial destiny is still being steered by a 19th century ghost? Consider the historical data. In 1870, a 31-year-old visionary in Cleveland, Ohio, held 4% of America's total refining power. Yet, within a decade, by 1880, his grip had tightened around 90% of the industry. By 1904, he dictated 91% of global oil production and 85% of all retail sales, drafting the blueprint for every modern monopoly. His name was John D. Rockefeller. The corporate architectures he pioneered and the monopolistic tactics he perfected didn't dissolve when the Standard Oil empire was fractured by the Supreme Court in 1911. They simply mutated. They expanded and now govern every facet of your existence in 2026. From the energy powering your smart home to the medicine in your cabinet, the digital platforms you inhabit to the banks you trust, all operate via the Rockefeller playbook. This strategy utilizes vertical integration to seize entire supply chains, horizontal consolidation to crush independent rivals, and regulatory capture through tax-exempt foundations to manipulate public policy. Rockefeller didn't merely construct a fuel empire. He engineered the framework of contemporary corporate dominance. Escape is illusory because the mechanism isn't just a company, it's the method. This methodology has been perfectly replicated for 150 years by giants like Amazon, Google, Pfizer, and J.P. Morgan. They inherited the same genetic code: total supply chain mastery, horizontal annihilation of competition, and philanthropic legitimacy. I will reveal exactly how Rockefeller weaponized this system to become history's wealthiest individual, and why 115 years after his empire's legal demise, you remain trapped in his design. Understanding this machinery is not academic. It is a prerequisite for survival. The structure is calibrated to siphon wealth from the masses and concentrate it at the apex. Once you decipher the code, you see his fingerprint everywhere. Born July 8, 1839, Rockefeller was the byproduct of a fraudulent cancer cure salesman and a devout Baptist mother. This fusion predatory ruthlessness, combined with absolute moral conviction, became his business DNA. He obliterated competitors without hesitation, genuinely believing God mandated him to organize industry for mankind's benefit. To him, monopoly wasn't greed. It was the ultimate virtue of order. In 1859, the Titusville strike triggered a chaotic gold rush. While thousands gambled drilling into the dirt, Rockefeller, then a 20-year-old bookkeeper, perceived a different path. Drilling was high-risk luck. Refining was the predictable bottleneck. In 1863, he gambled $4,000 on his first refinery. Within 2 years, he dominated Cleveland's industry. But Cleveland hosted 30 rivals, and Rockefeller sought more than a share. He demanded the whole. He didn't just lower prices. He aimed to delete competition. He did it through a method that became the foundation of corporate America: vertical integration. In the corporate landscape of 2026, we often discuss ecosystems, but Rockefeller defined it as vertical integration, the absolute dominance over every link in the industrial chain. Most of his contemporaries were content to simply refine oil, remaining dependent on external suppliers for crude, transportation, and storage. Rockefeller, however, viewed every external transaction as a structural weakness. To him, paying a middleman was akin to a tax on his genius. He decided to swallow the entire process. He didn't merely purchase barrels. He acquired the forests, the drying kilns, and the manufacturing plants to craft them himself. While his rivals were hemorrhaging 25 cents per barrel to third-party makers, Rockefeller's internal system produced them for a mere 15 cents. This 10-cent margin became a lethal weapon in his arsenal. He then turned his gaze toward logistics. By owning his own fleet of tank cars and massive storage warehouses, he transformed the railroads from indifferent service providers into subservient partners. He leveraged his massive volume to extort secret rebates kickbacks from the railroads. That meant he paid less to ship his oil while his competitors were charged a premium. In 1870, this relentless focus culminated in the birth of the Standard Oil Company of Ohio. Though he initially controlled only 4% of the American refining market, his cost structure was already untouchable. This wasn't just superior management. It was predatory engineering. Because his internal costs were significantly lower than the industry average, Rockefeller could engage in aggressive price wars, selling kerosene at rates that would drive any competitor into bankruptcy while he still harvested a profit. Every step that once generated wealth for an outsider was now brought under his roof, creating a self-reinforcing loop of capital accumulation. This is the dark magic of the Rockefeller method, the creation of an environment where a competitor's survival is mathematically impossible. He proved that in a race to the bottom, the man who owns the floor always wins. By the time his rivals realized they were being outmaneuvered, Rockefeller had already secured the distribution networks and retail outlets, ensuring that the consumer had only one choice. This blueprint of total control, perfected over a century ago, remains the gold standard for any modern entity seeking to colonize an entire market sector today. Every single component, from raw timber to the final warehouse shelf, was an asset he owned, operated, and optimized for maximum extraction. His philosophy was simple. If you do not control the container, you do not control the contents. While vertical integration provided the structural efficiency for dominance, Rockefeller's second maneuver, horizontal integration, represented the raw exercise of industrial power. This was not about internalizing costs. It was about the systematic elimination of every external choice. In early 1872, Rockefeller initiated a calculated blitzkrieg, known to history as the Cleveland Massacre. Over a staggering 90-day window, he approached every independent refinery owner in the city with a chillingly simple ultimatum. He offered to acquire their assets at fair market value, often providing payment in Standard Oil stock and inviting them into his management ranks. For those who possessed the foresight to surrender, the transition was profitable. However, for those who dared to resist, Rockefeller unleashed the full weight of his economic machinery. He initiated localized price wars, dropping kerosene rates significantly below production costs. Since his integrated system allowed him to absorb losses that would bankrupt any standalone competitor, the outcome was mathematically certain. Rivals faced a brutal binary: sell to Standard Oil for pennies on the dollar, or watch their life's work evaporate in insolvency. Most chose survival through surrender. The few who fought were crushed by the weight of his subsidized efficiency, leaving them with absolutely nothing. By the conclusion of that 3-month campaign, which remains a dark chapter in world industrial history, Rockefeller had successfully consolidated 25 of Cleveland's 26 refineries under his singular banner. In just 1 quarter, he had catapulted his national refining footprint from a modest 4% to a commanding 25% of the entire nation's production. This was the blueprint for modern market colonization: offer an exit, and if refused, architect an economic collapse. Yet, Rockefeller's hunger extended far beyond the borders of Ohio. Throughout the late 1870s, he methodically replicated this scorched earth strategy across the industrial heartland of America. He moved into New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore, leveraging his massive capital reserves to buy out the remaining holdouts with surgical precision. He weaponized secret railroad rebates and strategic drawbacks to ensure his logistics costs remained a fraction of the market rate, making it impossible for others to compete on a level playing field. The railroads, fearing his volume, bowed to his demands for exclusive discounts. His vertical integration fed his horizontal expansion in a lethal feedback loop of aggressive growth. By 1879, less than a decade after incorporating Standard Oil, Rockefeller controlled an unprecedented 90% of the entire refining capacity in the United States. This was no longer merely a successful business. It had transformed into a total monopoly, an entity that could dictate the price of light for every American household. He had achieved the ultimate goal of the capitalist predator, a market without alternatives. This period proved that in the Rockefeller system, competition was not a healthy market dynamic, but a temporary inefficiency to be removed forever. By the dawn of the 1880s, the blueprint was complete, and the era of the Titan had truly begun. His dominance was now total and absolute. However, achieving total market saturation was merely the first obstacle. Rockefeller realized that absolute power is inherently vulnerable to legal scrutiny and public outrage. To insulate his empire, his legal team engineered a revolutionary mechanism in 1882, the Standard Oil Trust. Since 19th century laws restricted corporations from owning shares in other states, the trust acted as a ghost entity. 41 associates under Rockefeller's tight orbit surrendered their stock to a board of trustees. This wasn't just a company. It was a centralized command structure for a national shadow empire. It became the definitive prototype for every holding company that defines the 2026 economy, from Alphabet to Berkshire Hathaway. By 1904, the machine was flawless, commanding 91% of American refining and 85% of final consumer sales. Rockefeller had become a financial deity, possessing a net worth of $900 million, roughly $400 billion in today's inflation-adjusted terms. This made him significantly wealthier than the combined fortunes of the tech titans of our current era. Yet, as his wealth ascended, his reputation cratered. The public viewed him as a predatory robber baron. This resentment found its voice in 1906 through investigative journalist Ida Tarbell, whose scathing expose revealed the visceral brutality of his tactics, from secret kickbacks to the systematic crushing of small family businesses. The resulting political firestorm led the Supreme Court to invoke the 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act. In a landmark 1911 ruling, the court declared Standard Oil an illegal monopoly and ordered its immediate disintegration into 34 independent entities. On the surface, it appeared to be a victory for the people, but for Rockefeller, it was a massive financial windfall. He retained significant equity in every new fragment, including the companies that would eventually become Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and Amoco. Paradoxically, the breakup unlocked hidden value. While Standard Oil stock was valued at $600 per share before the ruling, the combined valuation of the new entities soared past $2,000 shortly after. His personal fortune didn't just survive the intervention, it tripled. The 1911 mandate didn't actually kill the monster. It merely decentralized the cells, allowing them to thrive and eventually reconsolidate. For example, the 1999 merger of Exxon and Mobil proved that the system possesses a biological drive toward reunion. This historical pivot demonstrated Rockefeller's ultimate genius. He understood that the structure of the system is far more important than any single brand. By the time the dust settled, he had successfully converted a hated monopoly into a diversified investment portfolio that was virtually impossible to regulate. He had built a system that benefited from its own destruction, setting the stage for the corporate-dominated world we inhabit in 2026. These 34 fragments were simply the individual components of a larger, invisible whole that still breathes today. He proved that once you own the blueprint, you truly own the entire world, regardless of any legal labels or boundaries. He won. The ultimate triumph of John D. Rockefeller isn't found in a history book. It resides in your smartphone, your medicine cabinet, and your bank statement in 2026. His most enduring invention was the system itself, a master blueprint for total economic colonization. Take Amazon. It has perfected Rockefeller's vertical integration by owning every layer of the transaction, from the AWS servers hosting its rivals to the electric vans delivering its goods. Just as Rockefeller weaponized logistics, Amazon uses its massive data to launch horizontal strikes, creating Amazon Basics to undercut independent sellers. Google mirrors the trust structure through Alphabet, a holding company designed to shield assets and optimize tax efficiency across global borders. This isn't just business. It's a modern iteration of the 1882 legal ghost. In the pharmaceutical sector, the Rockefeller legacy of regulatory capture is alive and well. Companies like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson don't just compete in the market. They shape the very regulations that govern them, funding the agencies meant to oversee their products. And then there is the final masterpiece, philanthropy. Rockefeller discovered that by shifting wealth into tax-exempt foundations, one could transform public hatred into divine legitimacy while maintaining absolute policy influence. Today's billionaires Gates, Zuckerberg, and Buffett follow this exact script, using charity to steer global health and education agendas. Even the Rockefeller family remains a silent titan, with David Rockefeller's century-long influence over global finance ensuring the family's wealth siphons through hundreds of trusts and foundations. You cannot escape this matrix because it is designed to be the very air you breathe. You choose between Exxon and Chevron, both descendants of the same root. You pay for convenience on platforms that uses predatory pricing models. The system is remarkably efficient. Standard Oil dropped kerosene prices from 58 cents to 8 cents, an 86% reduction. Today, Google provides instant information for free, but you pay with the data that fuels their monopoly. The problem isn't that the system fails. It's that it works too well, concentrating trillions at the apex while delivering just enough efficiency to keep the bottom compliant. As we navigate 2026, your options are limited. Accept the consolidation, fight for antitrust revival, or pragmatically invest in the extractors themselves. Rockefeller died in 1937, yet his theology that competition is a sin has become the invisible constitution of global trade. He replaced the chaos of the market with the cold, calculated order of the monopoly. If you now see the bars of the cage he built 150 years ago, then you have taken the first step toward true awareness. The system doesn't need your approval. It only needs your participation. Understanding it is the only path to financial survival. Subscribe to Unmask the Giants and see clearly. You live in a world designed by a ghost who never truly left the board. His system is eternal, and you are in. Subscribe to Unmask the Giants and see clearly.